Hey y'all, it's Laura and welcome back to a new series. This one's all about embellishment clusters, which is something that has been highly requested. So this is a quick 6-video series and I'm going to be going over the 5 types of embellishment clusters that I make the most often. And then the 6th video will discuss positioning of clusters, which is something that I know a lot of you have had questions about, and I have some very easy ways to think about how to put your clusters around your photos and around your layout in general. Now, I do find it easier to create playlists to keep all of these series intact in one place so you can find them easily. So if you go to my profile, and there's a little bar across the top that has home, videos, etc. And one of them is playlists. And if you click on it, you can find each of my series all compacted into one nice little clean list, which I adore. So there will be a full playlist for this series as well. So if you've missed any of the videos, you can go back and check those out. Now let's jump over to the desk and dive into today's cluster. This week's clustering style I call scattered. And that's because we're not doing the heavy layering like the corner clusters we talked about last week. This week, we're keeping it very loose. We might have some slight overlapping here and there, but it's not one solid piece. Instead, it's little bits and pieces that make up the shape. Now, this can go in any direction. This can be vertical, it can be horizontal, it can be a corner cluster like these. But because they're so open and so loose where there's hardly any overlap at all, I give them their own category. Now in this example, we have one that is kind of vertical. So we've seen the around the corner, but we can also do a bit of a vertical. In this case, I've created a small grouping here, but the other pieces are pretty loosely stacked around the page with big open gaps in between them. This is intentional. What this does is it fills space without overwhelming the layout. This particular page has a lot of color happening on it, and I didn't want to overwhelm my photos that have pretty neutral colors in them, other than the blue, but a lot of this brick and stonework, and even my sun, is kind of a neutral color. And so I wanted to make sure we zoned in on the photos first. So even though I've created these loose clusters here, because they're not really substantial, they don't draw your attention. The photos do. Here's another example of the scattered clustering. Now remember I said in the very first video that I sometimes do a full-on clustering down one side of the page. This is an example of that. Sometimes I don't do multiple clusters on a page. Sometimes it's just one big one that stands on its own as the main decor on the page. This is an example. Again, we have some very slight overlapping here of some of the bits and pieces. But generally, it's just an open scattering of shapes. Now you can do this with circles, hearts, stars, florals, it doesn't matter. It works, all of them. So this is very vertical shaped, as is this one. Now this one, again, with the clustering, very vertically shaped. But this one's nice and open with hardly any overlapping at all. If anything, it's tucked in behind and on top of the photo and journaling spot, but the pieces don't touch each other at all. And that is a nice, open, loose, scattered embellishment cluster. This one here has clusters on either side of my photos. And again, while some of them do overlap, overall the cluster itself is nice and open and loose. All of the pieces are separate on the outside, which gives it that scattered look. You don't have to do it in a vertical orientation, but I tend to do an orientation that's vertical, I notice. I tend to like that. A lot of the layouts that I pulled had it. So I thought that was really interesting to note about my own scrappy tendencies, if you will. But let's go ahead and do a quick scattered cluster and show you what I mean. As you might expect with a scattered cluster, you just need a lot of shapes. So in this case, I tend to start with a couple of larger shapes and plant those first. So we could go vertical, let's go diagonal, because you know what? I did vertical in quite a few of the layouts I showed you. But I'll grab the larger shapes and just kind of place them out in a general diagonal shape. All right, so we're just building our cluster this direction. This is very similar, of course, to my diagonal go-to design. It uses the same concept. The difference is that quite often we will slightly overlap. Okay, so they are still clusters. They're definitely embellishments clustered together, but they're open and rather loose. There we go. So now we have a loose scattered embellishment cluster. Now I might bring in my photo here and just tuck it in just there and have the embellishment cluster sliding up one side. I may also choose to do the entire background like in my go-to designs. And then I would just place my photos around the open areas on the layout. So in this case, we could pull this one down. We could pull these photos together here in the center. I do tend to put my photos together quite often, and then layer these back behind my photos or even overlapping, but they're a nice open, loose design. I hope that was helpful to give you a quick example of how to make a scattered embellishment cluster. Again, you can have some slight overlap, but generally it's pretty open and loose. Repeating shapes is the most common way I do this, whether it's floral, circles, hearts, what have you. And it's probably one of the easiest ones to do. It really helps too if you can bring in some smaller versions, so these little bitty hearts or these little bitty hearts to scatter around the outside. That really helps the effect just a little bit more, just dresses it up just a little bit more. These tiny little hearts, you would be amazed the difference on a layout something like these little detail pieces can make. They just add an interesting dynamic by having such a severe change in the size of the embellishment. So that's it for the scattered version, the scattered clustering embellishments. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Be sure to come back next week for another cluster of embellishment ideas. And until next time, bye.